Welcome back to Bandwidth Blog on Air, where in this week's episode we're carrying on in part 2 of our Listeners' Mail episode, where we're answering all of your questions.
Welcome back to Bandwidth Blog on Air. This is episode 10.
Welcome to Bandwidth Blog on Air, the weekly podcast of bandwidthblog.com.
All right, our next question, Mindla Javindavam asks us, when did Bandwidth Blog start?
Well, Bandwidth Blog started as a blog, and it was actually started by a man called Charles Norman, and he was very much the same as we are in terms of, just keeping up to date with technology trends, and he really enjoyed writing about it. But it was a hobby for him, and he basically did it every now and again when he had time. And from that, he moved into some other businesses, and that's where he kind of started to diversify what he was doing, and he started to get more people involved. And it only became a full-fledged website maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And from then, it's been run as a website, not a blog. And it works like a website, not a blog. So we've got that part in our name because of legacy. And we did build some good readership and following when it was a blog. So just for the sake of consistency, we wanted to keep that as is, but we just need to tell people that it's actually not a blog. It's a website, because blog can sometimes scream amateurish or not regular content, which is not what we're about. But we've been going now for almost 10 years, which is crazy to think. We also have an interesting question from Trevor Madonsela, and he asks, why is the world so smartwatch crazy? What real perks do you have other than it just pushing notifications to your wrist?
Well, Trevor, this is something that speaks closely to my heart, and it's a question I ask myself often, because often I get these smart wearables on my desk to review, and I kind of think to myself, at the end of the day, I could go without this. It's not as essential to my life as my smartphone is. And I think, to be honest, a lot of the technology that comes out with smartwatches is a bit gimmicky at the moment. It's nothing we haven't seen on an Android or iOS smartphone maybe in the past 5 years. And the major play at the moment with these smartphones is the idea of the ecosystem. So it's the fact that your smartphone doesn't become the central sort of driving force in your digital life anymore, and now it's more your smartwatch. So your smartwatch is for the lighter things, which you're going to be checking your SMSs, your calls, notifications, and when you want to do something maybe a bit more intensive, like take a proper photo or video or run a specific app, that's what you're going to pull out your smartphone to do. And some smartwatches do come with that functionality that is interesting. You'll look at some of the Samsung Gear S series has really accurate fitness tracking, which if you want to work out or go for a jog, I suppose, great, you can use that for tracking. But ultimately, if you had a mid to high end flagship, you're not missing out on anything much at the moment. And I think it's going to take as long as smartphones took to get to where they are now for wearables to get there too. And I think ultimately wearables aren't really going to be the thing they're being marketed as until they're as invisible as being in our collars or under our sleeves where you can't see it but you know it's there. Vaughan Wilkinson has a good question for us. He says that he's due for an upgrade, and is the Huawei P8 really worth looking into, or should he move back to Samsung or go to Apple? And the second part of the question is, how the heck do we pronounce Huawei? Now, I'll hand over this to Theunis, and we can talk about it for a bit from there, but from what I know, it's pronounced Huawei. Huawei. It's not Huawei. I pronounced it as Huawei for years, so I think Huawei is the acceptable way to pronounce it.
That's definitely correct, and the company actually had a big marketing push so that people started pronouncing it correctly. So yes, it is Huawei. So if you want to know which way, it's Huawei. That's how they kind of punted the ads. Well, we often get asked these questions, Samsung or Apple, and luckily Vaughan has talked about the P8 as well, because we definitely think that's a contender for one of the better phones out there. Now, it's very difficult for me to give someone advice as to what kind of phone they would get if I don't have a background of what their usage is, what do they need the smartphone for, and what kind of user are they. For people that just want something to work and work well without having to have any real input, I would say go iOS, go iPhone, because it's easy to just pick up an iPhone and you'll know how it works, and it's easy to use. That does come with some caveats. of course, like, you know, you can't really change anything. It's not customizable. And that's something that a lot of other people value, and those people should go on Android. Now, we're not leaving the Windows mobile people out in the dark. I mean, there's a place for that as well. But just in terms of the Android iOS question, I think that's the best way to answer it. Now, in terms of phones, I definitely prefer the iPhone over the Galaxy S6, without question. And when it comes to Android, I think there are actually much better options than the Galaxy S6 because of the issues I spoke about earlier regarding the software. If I had to put my money down right now on an Android device, I would probably go for the LG G4. It's between that and maybe one of the new Moto phones that has just been released, because I think that's obviously a bit cheaper. But I do prefer the LG G4 over the Samsung, and I also actually prefer the Huawei P8 over the Samsung. But between the G4 and the P8, I think I would choose the G4.
Well, Theunis, I'm actually really happy you mentioned the LG G4 amongst that bunch, because, to be honest, it would be my answer as well. I've never really been a terrific Samsung fan. They do make some really good phones, but it's never really been a mark that's appealed to me. And the remaining two on the list, the Huawei and the iPhone, it's quite a big jump. Without knowing, what Vaughan likes or has, his background in smartphones or brand preferences or what specifically he'd like to get out of a smartphone is a difficult question to answer. But I think the maybe the best trade-off between those two, the iOS has the slicker experience, but it's less changeable, less customizable, and the Huawei I found is that much more open, but it still lacks some of that slickness and simplicity that iOS brings. And I would probably go with the G4, number one, because of its camera. That's what I would really like out of the phone, and its battery life. It stands just that cut above the iPhone and the Huawei P8 at present. So that's where I would probably direct you, Vaughan. I hope that answers your question. Okay, a question from Patrick Heathcock. Have we had any indication of when the Samsung Galaxy Note 5 is going to be released? And have we found a substantial improvement in its camera?
All right, we have confirmation from Samsung SA that the Note 5 will be here alongside with the S6 Edge Plus in November this year. So unfortunately, it's a couple of months after the international launch, which is quite strange, actually, because Samsung usually launches their devices worldwide at the same time. So that's quite disappointing from an SA perspective. And then regarding the Note 5's camera, we haven't seen any improvement because it's, of course, the exact same hardware as we had on the Galaxy S6 Edge. Mbale Ndwandwe asks, which tablet is good for schoolwork and which would you recommend that has a good battery life?
All right. Well, I'm actually really excited to answer this question, but I'm at a bit of a disadvantage, Mbale, because I don't sort of know what price you're able to afford and what specific tasks you'd like to do. But I think I'd be able to help you in that I've used a tablet at university since I was there in first year. I bought myself an iPad 2 when it first came out, and I used that for about 3 to 4 years, and now I use a Windows tablet. And in all honesty, I think what I can recommend to you is that if you want a serious tablet for schoolwork that you need to do performance on, that you're going to need to do your Microsoft Office work, I would recommend that you look at a Windows tablet. Some of the Windows tablets that I've looked at offer a really, really great range of features for their price tag. I myself, I actually use a Microsoft Surface Pro 3, which is quite expensive as it's imported by Takealot. It's not available locally in South Africa. And there, if you can afford that, it's probably about 10,000 Rand. I would recommend you look at the Core i3 bundle. A, it's the most accessible, and B, it's actually got better performance than the Core i5, I found, because the Core i5 has a slight overheating issue. But to come down from that, and if you want to look more at mid-range, I'd say you can probably get a really good Windows tablet, either from Mesa, which does their own Windows tablet line. Make sure you get a keyboard with that as well, or the Dell Venue 8 series. I would recommend as quite a good, solid competitor. I'd recommend that if you get a Windows 8 tablet, that you get yourself a keyboard as well. So be sure to factor that into the price. I think for me, and what I've found, I think it's the best overall package in terms of productivity. And you're never going to be left in the dark if you need to run, a full-on desktop app or do something that involves plugging in a peripheral, through a USB port. All right, our next question, Jimmy Naidu asks us, why is fiber rollouts in South Africa so limited when there is a clear demand for it?
Yeah, there's definitely a big demand for it, and I think a lot more people can actually afford it than one might think. It's not as expensive as you would think it is. A starting connection will probably be from around 1,500 rand a month, I would say, depending on your carrier. The reason the rollout is taking so long is first and foremost because of the infrastructure. I mean, it's a very expensive infrastructure to actually install, and because it's mostly being done by private companies, that have to build their own network. I mean, it's a big investment to build that infrastructure without knowing how many people are actually going to take up the offer. I do think that we'll see it more and more. I mean, there's a bunch of places there's a lot of suburbs in Joburg that already have fiber. They've started rolling it out in Cape Town as well, and I think it will spread to the big cities definitely within the year. If you live in a smaller town, you probably won't see it very soon, but as I said, the reason it's taking this long is because of infrastructure.
Our next question, Nadima Regal asks us, do you think that the Huawei Mate S will live up to the standard set by the Mate 7, seeing as it's got a smaller battery life and screen size?
Well, in my mind, it's actually great to see a company bucking the trend of, ever increasing sizes in smartphones, and for them to bring their new Mate down from 6 inches in screen size to 5.5 inches, I think is a very, very good move. Without a doubt, the Mate 7 was a good phone, but I've got a really, really good feeling about the Mate 8, and I really can't wait to get my hands on it. It has a smaller battery because obviously it's a smaller phone, and it is powering a smaller screen, so I don't think the battery life will be an issue, and I would not say that it has inferior specs, but early indications are that this device is going to be, it's going to be better than the Mate S in every way. And I think a big part of that is going to be its camera. Obviously, they improved the camera performance a lot with the P8, and I think that'll carry over to the Mate S. But the design has been kept very, very much the same as the Mate 7. It still has that curved, metal back with a fingerprint scanner on the back. So it looks very much the same, just in a smaller package, and I think that's a great move. Cara Morris asks an interesting question, actually. She talks about what is the best option for cloud storage. He specifically names Dropbox and Google Drive. Now, there are, of course, other options as well, but what is your experience? What do you think?
Well, this is actually a question that I'm really excited to answer because it's something I've got quite a lot of experience in. I'm actually a part-time photographer myself, so I need a cloud storage solution that's going to work for me and be able to publish all my photographs at the best resolution to all the devices I have. And to do that, I don't actually use Dropbox or Google Drive. I actually use OneDrive because I find it's the easiest solution to manage photos as they're taken. With Windows 10, Microsoft came up with the new Photos app, and that automatically lists all the photos that are stored in your OneDrive, in your camera roll, or in an uploads folder, and it lists them out quite nicely. And to me, that's really invaluable because whether I'm working on my Mac at home or my Windows tablet, it's nice to easily be able to organize all my photos there. And OneDrive doesn't compress the photos. It doesn't offer a full resolution service like Google Drive does, but I've found that it's the best solution to keep all my raw images and all my other sort of JPEG and PNG images in one place. I don't particularly know what kind of photos you want to store, if it's more photography raw files, which are larger, or just generally the snaps you'll take from your smartphone or the uploads you take from your camera, but I would actually recommend OneDrive as the better solution to the two. Secondly, if you're invested in Google and you make use of Gmail and similar services, then I'd say I would pick Google Drive over the two because you're going to benefit from the full resolution upload, as well as all of Google's auto awesome software, and it'll tweak your photos for you on the fly, so you won't have to worry about that later.
I'd actually like to add that I use all of them, and I mostly take photos on my smartphone. I'm not a brilliant photographer, but for those never to miss moments, you want those images to be stored somewhere, not on your phone. And I actually use Dropbox, Google Drive, and OneDrive. And I agree with you that OneDrive is a great solution. But the reason Dropbox is a very good solution for a lot of people is because I think you get more free storage. What I really like about all three of these apps is that you can, and that you can, and I do set the apps to automatically upload anything you take on your smartphone once you get to a Wi-Fi connection, and that just makes so much sense. And I love having it in different places. I mean, sometimes when I use a Windows phone, it's much easier to get at the photos on OneDrive, whereas on Android, it's probably the easiest to do it on Dropbox. And another reason I prefer Dropbox is because sharing images is a lot easier. So it depends basically on how much storage you need. If you're going to have to buy some extra storage, the prices do also differ. But just in terms of performance, ease of usability, I think all three of them are fine.
Our next question is an interesting one from Jonathan Koo, and he asks us, what tech product has proved most life-changing for us? For me, I think that's an interesting question. I think it would probably be the very first, my very first Apple MacBook. Actually, my parents bought me one just as it came out. I was interested basically in media creation. It was probably when I was about 14 to 15 years old. And I think that changed my life because it proved that it taught me, although it's not especially difficult to learn on a MacBook software back then, I think, it taught me a whole lot of things based on working in an audio workshop environment in GarageBand, or editing images in Photoshop, which in my case later turned into InDesign and Illustrator. That's what I use the most. And I think that's where it really took off for me, and I think that's what transformed my understanding of what a computer can really do. Had I not had that laptop, I don't know what I'd be doing today, because I think it awakened me to the tech sphere as a whole, and from there I sort of got into Apple's products, and then just tech in general. And I think that's probably that laptop I think is probably the most life-changing product I've ever had, and I still swear by it. I still use it.
My reasons are very much the same as yours are, but it's a completely different device. I would have to say that my most life-changing device I've ever owned was my first cell phone, and that was the Nokia 3310, that lovely brick that I miss so much. And that, for the same reasons, it opened my eyes to, what technology can do for the consumer. And that basically pushed me in this direction. And just using this magical piece of phone that was at the time, so small and so usable and unbreakable, and it lasts forever on battery. I thought it was a great advancement. And that woke me up in terms of what tech can do in our lives, and I've never looked back since. Now, Joel's Lazarus asks, seeing that 2015 has been a bumper year for new smartphone launches, what is still to come in 2015 from Windows Phone, Android, and iOS, and which are we most excited about? Well, the iPhone was just launched this week, so we're not going to expect anything new from iOS or from Apple in terms of smartphones. But on the Android side, there might still be something to be excited about this year, the Mate S that's coming from Huawei. But we just saw the launch of the Xperia Z5, so we're not expecting anything new from Sony. And basically, I think the rest of the year is going to be quite subdued and quiet when it comes to smartphone launches. So the crazy time for smartphone launches is always between March and September, or the crazy time for smartphone launches is usually between February to September, because you've got CES and MWC at the beginning of the year, and then towards the end of the year, which just happened last week, was IFA in Berlin. Now, of all the phones that we've seen, there's so much class to pick from. We can talk about this for ages, but we won't bore you. Bryan, is there anything specifically that you are really looking forward to testing out that's been recently launched?
There is actually, and it's not something that might be the first thing to come to mind. A few weeks ago, I was at the launch of the LG G4 Beat, and I'll tell you why I'm excited about this is because I was a G3 Beat owner almost a year ago now. And I have to tell you, it probably was one of the worst Android phones I think I've used. I really didn't enjoy using it, and I ended up moving to my Xperia Z1. But having been to the G4 Beat launch, it's really changed my perception of what LG are doing with the Beat line. And I was really actually excited to see all the premium features that they've managed to distill into a more affordable price point. And I think it's going to be something that, if it's marketed well, will attract a lot of consumer interest. So I'm actually really looking forward to testing that out. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on the camera and giving that a thorough testing. Other than that, I think, like you say, it's going to be quite a quiet year, but that's actually what I'm most looking forward to. With me, Flagships, I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to flagships because we're not all able to afford them. I myself, I'm not able to afford, the latest and greatest, and I'm lucky to get my hands on them to review them. So I'm always interested to see what's coming out at mid-range and is pushing the envelope a bit. So that's where my attention is fixated at the moment. That's all for this episode of Bandwidth Blog on Air. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for sending us your questions. If we didn't happen to cover your question this time, stay tuned to the next episode of Bandwidth Blog. Stay tuned for further competitions in the future, and be sure to join us next week for Bandwidth Blog on Air.
Yeah, see you next week on episode 11.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Blog on Air, the weekly podcast of bandwidthblog.com.